but the government announced they were doing a complete siege on the 2.2 million.
Yeah, okay. You're talking about the siege. The siege. Now, we did for 10 years. We did collective punishment of Iraq. We actually
I'm not
killed.
trying to justify that either here.
But why are we just going after the Jews? Why is it only when Israel does? Let me just finish right now.
He jumped the gun early. He jumped the gun early. We're not that deep into the conversation. He's already pulled the card out.
Specifically, the topic of Israel, obviously very much in the news right now. So President Biden's administration, they have said that they have no red lines for the state of Israel and their conduct in this war. Do you have any red lines for Israel?
Well, the red lines are that you don't deliberately, you do everything you can, which I think Israel is doing right now to avoid civilian casualties. But there's collateral damage in every war, and they're fighting an.
We're about to get into that collateral damage.
I don't think there's any country in the world that would go as far as Israel has gone to not invade Gaza. I mean, Israel was being bombed by Hamas, took over Gaza. Israel walked out of Gaza. There's no occupation of Gaza.
The blockade, though.
Well, there's a blockade because Hamas declared war on Israel and sent suicide bombers off. So they put up a fence. So it's there. That's like the guy who kills his parents and then throws himself on the mercy of the court because he's an orphan. For them to say that they're blockaded, they're blockaded. And it's not just Israel blockading them; it's Egypt. Well, everybody has a problem with Hamas. In fact, after the 73 war, after the 67 war, Israel tried to give Hamas back to Egypt, and Egypt didn't want to take it because
Gaza.
Gaza back to Egypt. Egypt didn't want to take it because of the high level of sort of religious militant Islam that Egypt considered a threat to its own government. Let me just finish.
Sure.
Israel, Hamas took over in 2006.
Right.
And they immediately started shelling Israel. So they
Can we pause it?
Can we pause it for 1 second? On average, 2,000.
This guy's making a point that goes absolutely nowhere. So we've gone back in time to 1968 for no fucking reason. He kind of beats around the bush. He makes a weird argument about how a boy killing his parents and then fucking throwing themselves at the mercy of the court because they're an orphan. And then he talks about how Egypt didn't want the scraps of what had previously been Palestine and just accepting the rule of all of the parts of Israel that, Israel wanted. Oh, yeah, you can have Jerusalem. You can have all of our holiest land. We will take the part of the country that you absolutely do not want and call it a victory. Like, of course, they've rejected that. So then he jumps all the way back to 2006. But he doesn't want to go back in time to talk about the origin, to be like, oh, wait, hold on. So you said, after World War II, 1948, we have to have a place for the Jewish people. Well, what about all those people that were living there before? See, he doesn't want to go back that far. He wants to go back to where it's really convenient. They always want to jump to the same points. They want to talk about how Egypt didn't want Gaza, what he just said right here, and then they'll go back to the Oslo Accords. Well, they'll be like, we really chopped up the country, and we were going to give you all the shit that, we didn't really want, and you guys said no, so it fucking saw on you that we just continued to terrorize you and subjugate you and make you second-class citizens, bro. Like, what did you want?
1,000 rockets a year on civilian populations, and their charter and their public statements day after day are it's against Islamic law for them to even negotiate with Israel, except as a ruse. It says that in their charter. The only satisfaction for them, the only goal, is to annihilate Israel and kill every Jew, not just in Israel, but all around the world. So Israel, instead of going in and attacking, if Mexico elected a communist government, and the communist government began sending shells onto civilian populations in San Antonio and Houston and say, we're going to retake Texas, which they have a legitimate claim to. We're going to retake it. How long would it take us to go in there? It wouldn't take us very long. We would go in and we would do whatever it took to take out the people who are sending the shells. And Israel, instead of doing that, Israel did something extraordinary, which is it invested in an Iron Dome. which is to defend itself again, just to live with missiles. There's thousands, tens of thousands of Israelis that on that part of Israel that have been raised in bomb shelters. Who would put up with that? There's nobody in the world.
No one here is excusing the actions of Hamas, but I think you would agree that one atrocity does not justify another. So how can you hold on?
Whoa, can we
hold on.
Just alpha moment for Krystal that I have to announce right there. She just she gives him the old Bobby, calm down. I'm like, woo. Bro, there's one thing about Krystal, and I don't want to interrupt for too long because I know people hate that shit, but there's one thing about Krystal that I think she's the embodiment of, you know how people talk about how there's not enough women in media because it fucks up our way to get coverage and well-rounded reason and all that stuff. Krystal is the embodiment of how that argument is so valid. The way that she's able to maintain her entire composure, she never gets into an ego contest with the guests, always able to fucking de-escalate and get back to the root of the issue. These are all traditionally feminine qualities that I feel for a long time were kept out of the media. It was either really rigid and stiff or you weren't going to broach the issues. And then if you did, it immediately becomes a mad dog, Vanguard podcast episode. But what Krystal does so fucking brilliantly is that she's able to be 100% stern, and I mean this in the best way possible. It's very maternal. She's able to just take the maternal wheel and be no, okay, enough screaming, people. I am gonna de-escalate and I'm gonna make sure that we stay on track here. And I think it's a phenomenal asset to her as an interviewer and as a host. It's really unique to see.
How can you say, though? How can you say?
But calling it an atrocity.
I haven't finished my question.
Right, go ahead.
How can you say that Israel is doing everything they can to avoid civilian death when the civilian death toll, even by Israeli estimates, and this is the low, this is the best possible number you could put on it, is 61% innocent civilians, thousands of children, thousands of women. That's worse than the combination of every 20th century conflict combined. So how can you look at that and combine with the complete siege of 2.2 million people and say that they are doing everything they can to protect civilian life?
First of all, what you said is not true. We killed 750,000 civilians in Iraq.
She's talking percentage-wise.
What?
She's talking percentage-wise.
The percentage of the average kill rate in Afghanistan, Mosul, in those battles, in modern warfare is about 8 or 9 to 1 civilians to military.
And you think that's fine? 80% civilian death? You're fine with that?
I don't think a single civilian death is fine. I'm not a single, but when we went into Germany to get out the Nazis,
here we go.
We killed 2 million Germans. We bombed Dresden.
Which is why, and actually there's an analysis that just came out that showed the bombing.
And again, as obviously in retrospect, people have talked about the bombing of Dresden, as we just did, potentially being unnecessary, horrible, horrific destruction of innocent civilian life.
Nagasaki, Tokyo firebombing and all that shit.
Right. But at least in that instance, you can say, well, they had to defeat the Nazis. The Nazis were bent on fucking world domination. You can't say that about Hamas. Hamas has no power. And not that Hamas is just or, that they're good or defensible or anything like that. But Hamas is not going to fucking roll into neighboring countries and start invading shit, trying to take over. It's just completely different. You can't reference the response to Nazism and use that to justify any and all war crimes inflicted upon the people of Gaza and Palestine in general, which has been the Israeli response to the terrorist attacks on October 7th. Again, the terrorist attacks were bad, but to say that warrants the same response that the fucking Nazis did, bent on global domination, what?
Northern Gaza has been more devastating and more destructive than our bombing of Dresden. I would also say after World War II, that's why we put in place things like the Geneva Conventions, to make sure that we did as much as we could to protect civilian life. So when you say, let me give you a specific report that you can respond to. The Washington Post, we can put this up on the screen, guys. This is the second element.
R2.
The Washington Post just reported that Israel dropped U.S. supplied white phosphorus in an attack in Lebanon in a way that is inconsistent with the laws of war, directly impacting a civilian population. Are these, now you might say, look, maybe the report's in dispute, maybe we need to go and investigate, but is this or any other of Israeli conduct in this war, is this something that you think should be investigated for potential violations of international law?
Again, if Israel dropped white phosphorus on civilian populations illegally, then they should be prosecuted for war crimes.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's strong evidence that they've done that. And Israel absolutely denies it. There is a there are legal ways to use white.
So this is his this is his just abandonment of reality. One, they put it up on screen like, hey, we have the nuts and bolts on this. The World Health Organization has said this. You know, the Human Rights Watch has said this. And oh yeah, the United States, we're not going to fund an independent investigation with our own money because we know how that would turn out. So it's up to these, international bodies to go in there. And we've known for a while that it was used at the, was it first suggested at the border of Lebanon? But yeah, there's been multiple allegations. This is the one that we have the actual nuts and bolts for. And it's like, he just passively says, well, if that happened, then they should be tried for war crimes. Well, it's like, well, don't you think that they should also stop fucking doing what they're doing? Never occurs to him to say that.
White phosphorus because it's used, in war, which is as a concealant. And Israel says that's what it's doing. Here's what Israel has done. Israel has calls people before they bomb them. Nobody else in the world does that. It's made 20,000 live calls. So an Arab-speaking IDF member who calls the landlord, they have the telephone numbers of everybody in Gaza. Now, there's a lot of connectivity problems, so they can't always
barely sell access right now.
Let me finish. They've made 20,000 live calls with people telling, here's what's going to happen. You need to move out. In your neighborhood, on your building. They've sent one.
Hey, Zach, by the way, in about 2 hours, I'm going to firebomb your fucking apartment. I hope that's cool with you.
Oh, shit, bro. Thanks for the heads up. I would have been really sad if you would have just blown up my entire house without telling me. You know what? We should give you a Nobel Peace Prize. Also, I want to bring this up really quick. Yeah, so this is the Times of Israel. I want to use a source that I think that RFK would be fucking satisfied by. So let's pull this up from the Times of Israel. So he was like, they're telling everybody where to go before they bomb it. Oh, wait. Israel said to bomb Rafah crossing to Egypt after telling Gazans to flee to it. Army distances itself from comments by military spokesman, says it hit underground tunnel area. Oh, yeah, I'm sure they fucking did. Basically, what they were doing, we have multiple instances of it. Of this, it's the first one that comes up, but they will literally direct people to the Rafah crossing, as RFK alluded to in this. Will be like, oh, why don't they go to Egypt? Egypt doesn't want them either. Okay, well, Egypt says yes, we will take these refugees, and then they start bombing the Rafah crossing, which is the way that you would get from fucking Gaza to Egypt. Anyway, so just to bring that up, the Humanitarian Impulse and RFK and the idea.
0.2 million robocalls. They've sent 1.2 million pamphlets. The pamphlets are color-coded for date and for time, so that you don't see an old pamphlet and say, oh, this won't apply to me. So people know when that building is going to get bombed. And they do something nobody else in the world does, because they invented it, which is they send in roof knockers, which is a projectile that hits the roof 2 hours before they
roof knockers sounds like a night at the strip club. Yeah, it's our 45 plus night if you want to come out for the roof knockers.
Yeah, this is fucking unhinged. Like, Krystal just put the stat forward that, like, percentage wise, more civilians have been killed in this conflict than basically all other 21st century conflicts, if you look at it, at least percentage wise, right? But his retort is like, yeah, but they do those war crimes in a very respectful way. They let people know beforehand. They hand out flyers announcing the war crimes. Like, what the fuck is this, like, weird respectability politics applied to fucking war crimes? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, he also sits there with the straight face. We didn't get into this right off the bat. We didn't get into it, but he makes a big show about how they're, like, doing their best to make sure that they're not doing any harm, that they're limiting the damage as much as possible. And we could show you guys all of the, like, incredible fucking just insanely devastating footage that comes out where it just shows that it's not the fucking truth, right? Or that we could say that they have the quote where it's like, what does it say? The fucking emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy. And that's from an IDF spokesperson, right? We could show you all of that, and that would be one thing. But you've already seen that. Let me just really quickly show you that they can't even keep their own fucking guys out of the way. They can't even keep their own fucking guys out of the way. Today, this is just breaking I'll go ahead and put this up. I saw this before we went live today, and I made sure to pin it in case it came up. The IDF say that 3 Israeli hostages were mistakenly identified as threats and killed. So they're shooting their own fucking hostages. Like, I'm not talking about the hostages that they have procured that they're saying are Hamas affiliated hostages. No. I'm talking about going into Gaza and then killing 3 of the hostages that they're so worried about bringing back home. Just coming in during combat in Shejaya, the IDF mistakenly identified 3 Israeli hostages as a threat. As a result, the troops fired towards them and they were killed. I bet the real translation of this was we saw them and they fucking got whacked. Like, couldn't tell if they were fucking Palestinians or not, and so we just took them out. You know, that seems to be the fucking gut instinct that's taught to the people in the IDF. I would imagine it's based off of the evidence that I've seen. It has to be. But anyway, they can't even keep their guys safe. I know that the other day, if I'm not mistaken, they covered it on Breaking Points as well. The fucking 20% of the casualties, almost, like I think it was 20 out of 105 casualties from the invasion of Gaza were friendly fire. I think like maybe a little over 10 of them coming from an airstrike, and then the other being like an explosion of like a utility vehicle. So they can't even keep their own guys safe. And you want me to believe that they're out here really fucking making an effort to make sure that no innocent civilians are killed? We've just seen that that's not the case. You have to be fucking 100% propagandized. You have to be, you know, committed to not learning the truth, unseeing anything, you know, only believing you know, the narrative and not your lying eyes as it is, or whatever the fuck it's just embarrassing at this point to see this guy out here pretending that he's fucking, you know, telling the truth.
Yeah. And if Israel is really going out of its way to make sure that there's no civilian casualties, like, they're doing a piss poor fucking job of it. I just don't understand what the implication is from RFK here. It's like, well, they sent the roof knockers and the pamphlets, but I guess all these Gazans just wanted to die. You know, they ignored the pamphlets. And when the roof knocker hit their building, they just said, fuck it, I'm going to, you know, finish this episode of TV I'm watching. Who cares if the bomb actually hits my apartment? Like, what are you saying, bro? Everyone wants to live. No one wants to die in a fucking bombing. So if they actually are dropping off pamphlets and they actually are fucking, you know, sending roof knockers, whatever the hell that is, to warn people, apparently it's not working. Either that, or your implication is that all these Gazans are just too lazy and they're, you know, just can't be bothered to leave their apartment before the bomb hits.
Just want to stay where they're going to be bombed, bro. And also, if that is the case, dude, do you think it might be because they know that they're fucking never going to be able to come back if they leave, that they're trying desperately to hold on to where they've lived their whole fucking life? Do you have no soul? That's where he reveals himself right here. He's a fucking Kennedy for sure, because he's got that fucking soulless nepotism to him. I swear to God. I never got to live to watch any of the Kennedys, but I've had a lot of thoughts reassured. You know, I read The Dark Side of Camelot.
In that building to get out because they're going to bomb it. In warning the civilians, they're also warning Hamas. And so it makes it much more difficult. And, you know, the fact there's many, many nations in the world that would just go and flatten the whole place, which Israel could do. It doesn't have to go in there and put IDF soldiers at risk in hand-to-hand combat. This is Hamas has made a stand. They're putting civilians in the way. What is Israel supposed to do? It can't leave Hamas in there.
But Bobby, I don't think we should accept that from any state, Israel or any other. And I mean, they have rendered. So hold on. They've rendered Gaza City uninhabitable at this point. And there's been reports documenting that some of the procedures that you're talking about that they used in previous wars, they're not using this time. They've emphasized this attack on quote unquote power targets, which are things like civilian infrastructure and high-rise apartment buildings, not to get Hamas, but to create a quote shock in the civilian population. In addition, as I mentioned before, you have a collective punishment of 2.2 million people who are having their access to water, food, fuel, medicine blocked right now by Israel. This also appears to be in violation of the Geneva Conventions. Do you think that it's acceptable to impose a siege on the entire civilian population in Gaza?
If there's a violation, first of all, I don't think that's happening. Can we
pause it really quick? I don't give the dude a lot of Props. Saagar looking suave as fuck in this episode, bro. The camera was glazing at him right. He was off to the side. He's got a real good fade tight pomade situation going on. I'm not much of a suit guy, but I liked his watch. I was like, I got to give it up to Saagar. You know, this is honestly this has been my favorite performance from Saagar all year. He looked great. You know, he looked like the perfect right hand man. If Krystal needed him, he was right there. Honestly, it was great. It was great. You know.
If it violates the Geneva Convention, or if they're deliberately at any point anybody is deliberately targeting civilians, they should be prosecuted and they should be jailed and the key should be thrown away. But people say this, but I don't see any proof of that. Right now that people are deliberately targeting.
But the government announced they were doing a complete siege on the 2.2 million.
Yeah, okay. You're talking about the siege. The siege. Now, we did for 10 years. We did collective punishment of Iraq. We actually
I'm not
killed.
trying to justify that either here.
But why are we just going after the Jews? Why is it only when Israel does it? Let me just finish right now.
He jumped the gun early. He jumped the gun early. We're not that deep into the conversation. He's already pulled the fucking card out. He's like, oh, it was yeah. It always happens in the debate. At some point, you're kind of winning the game. Where at first it's like, we did it in Iraq, and they're like, yeah, that was fucking horrible. We are both fucking super opposed to that, and we are fucking extremely vocal about it. And there's a lot of tape you can find. I found, Anyway, yeah, yeah.
It's just crazy, as if fucking Krystal and Saagar apologize for other governments doing war crimes, like as if they would sit here and defend Saudi Arabia or something. Like, no. And if they were debating someone about Saudi Arabian policy and the person says, well, why do you just focus on Muslims? That would be equally as stupid. Like, obviously, they're discussing the country of Israel. They're not talking about Judaism here. They're talking about a government which is committing fucking war crimes. The religion that they, use to justify said war crimes is kind of irrelevant. I think it's pretty clear that Krystal nor Saagar are anti-Semitic, and that's not informing their commentary here. Clearly, this is a current event, pretty important thing happening right now. So, yeah, they're going to talk about it. But that's insane for him to say.
Going to fund what's going on, and the visuals of these children being killed and losing their parents and the rubble and the total destruction. This is something our government is backing.
I have friends in Gaza. Okay, I'm
sure you do. I'm sure you got a lot of pals there,
kids. And what
this guy, he knows Gaza. Nobody knows Gaza like I know Gaza. I got people in Gaza. I know people. They're Kennedy people. I know quite a few people on the ground in Gaza. They're Kennedy people. My father once told me, he said, the people of Gaza, they're Kennedy people. They belong to you. They are of your dynasty. We are going to set that in motion. Actually, it was my uncle who's quite literally responsible for a lot of what's happening right now, indirectly and directly. He did a lot of to make sure that we were going to impose dramatic suffering on the Palestinian people. And I've had my disagreements with where my family has stood on past political issues, but I want to remain loud and clear that if there's one thing that I stand proudly in favor of as a Kennedy, it is the destruction and the increased suffering of the Palestinian people. I want to make no two ways about it. I honor my uncle and my father's legacy accordingly.
He's living through right now is horrible. I have many Palestinian friends. I've been to West Bank. I've met with the Palestinian leadership. I love the Palestinian people. It's excruciating watching what's happened. But why are we blaming Israel? Why aren't we blaming
the ones
people
dropping the bombs?
They have
with our dollars.
They have to get at Hamas. They have to destroy Hamas. And Hamas, unfortunately, build tunnels for themselves, but they did not build bomb shelters for their people. And Israel has told people, move to the south. There's food trucks there. There's medicine there. There's fuel there.
But there's not.
It's only not there.
The area
because
they
Hamas
told them to
it.
go to is an area that is the size of LAX airport. It is a desert wasteland. There are no UN flag facilities. In fact, if you ask the Secretary General of the UN, he'll tell you there are no safe places in Gaza. You already have 1.8 million people who have been displaced from their homes. So, at what point do you say, okay, it's enough? Because the other piece of this, even if you say, and I know you're not saying this, I'm not putting, but even if you say, I don't care about the Palestinian lives, they got to do what they got to do. It's the cost of war. What are you going to do? There's also a lot of evidence that what they're actually doing is fomenting increasing support for Hamas. Because if you think about it, if you're a kid and your parents get blown up, what kind of politics do you think you're going to have when you grow up? Isn't that going to be tremendously radicalizing and incredibly compromising to the security of Israelis alike?
So how would you get rid of Hamas?
Well,
if you're Israel.
Well, I'm not running for president of the United States, number one.
But
But number two,
you.
I think we have a model for this in a sense from the way we went in and approached bin Laden. So it was a targeted raid. If you're actually going to do this, you do a counter-terror operation where you go in a targeted way. You create a wedge between Hamas and the civilian population. And we see how this works in the past, because previously in Israeli society, when there were pathways to peace that were on the table, where the Palestinian civilian population felt that they had a chance at negotiating some sort of a peaceful outcome, guess what? Support for Hamas falls off a cliff. It's almost a one-to-one relationship with the more brutal the response from the Israelis, the more support for radicalism that there is.
You can filibuster.
I'm not filibustering. You asked me a question. I'm trying to answer it.
I made a little something for everybody to see that pretty much sums up the rest of this conversation.
Yeah, I think you're filibustering. You're not answering the question. You're saying drive a wedge. Well, of course, Israel's trying to drive a wedge.
By offering some other path that's not terrorism and not violence.
What is that path?
It's a path to two-state solution or some sort of a just and lasting peace.
And the Palestinians not only have rejected that, but Hamas, its whole purpose was the reason that Hamas was able to get all this popular support and take over was because of its opposition to any negotiation.
Hamas just came out and said that they support Israel's PLO and recognize Israel's right to exist. On the other hand, you have the ambassador. But hold on, you have the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador of the UK saying we will absolutely no to a two-state solution.
I just cannot let you tell that's just not true.
Ismail Haniyeh
was on TV on Al Jazeera yesterday, saying we're going to do this again and again and again. We will never negotiate,
which we covered and which is disgusting. But there's what about the fact? But hold on. What about the fact that? What about the fact that Netanyahu and his government have said absolutely no? They built up Hamas to try to thwart any sort of Palestinian statehood. Where's the focus on that?
I'm not defending Netanyahu, and I'm not. I don't co-sign, what Netanyahu and Likud do. Israel is a divided country. 80 or 20% of the population.
It's like, I'm not defending Netanyahu. What you literally are. Who do you think is in charge?
In the street demonstrating against Netanyahu. What I'm saying is Hamas is a criminal enterprise.
Sure.
Yes. The Palestinian, and you talk about solutions for the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are arguably the most pampered people by international aid organizations.
Are you kidding me? No, even before this war, 78% of people in Gaza said they had, not enough food to eat.
We got to go back just to hear that.
You are listening to a Kennedy, not just a regular guy. You are listening to just a textbook definition of a Nepo baby into a fucking American dynasty. And even though he's done nothing but shit the bed for his entire fucking life, people are still taking him seriously in his fucking senseless presidential run. Anyway, all I'm saying is he's gonna call somebody else pampered. Are you fucking? I'm beside myself. I think Krystal is.